Hi, thanks. Thanks, Shivansh. Welcome everyone to the Teen Debaters' third session in the Debate 101 series. I'm Manan, and we are so excited to have you all here today. Please don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat during the session, and we'll definitely get back to you. The Debater is an organization dedicated to revolutionizing debate, education, access, and activity for schools and students across India. We want debate to be a powerful tool for social mobility and change and make it accessible for free. We aim to enhance your critical thinking, expand your worldview, but also go beyond debate and build a community. Your speaker for this session and argumentation will be Shivansh Gupta, the teen debater. Further. Hi Shivansh, how are you?
Thanks, Manan. We'll get started with the session now. So again, today's session is on argumentation. Whoever has just joined in, we'll learn the basics of argumentation, what are arguments, and we'll cover from there. So we can move to the next slide. The next slide is just pretty basic on who we are. And we don't need to explain more into this, but basically, if you're new to us, we're the Teen Debater. We're an organization trying to teach debate for free, debates and MUNs for free for everyone. There's no restrictions to anyone who wants to join in. Of course, all of this is made online to make it easier for you to join in as well. All our goals and everything is listed here. For knowing more, you can check us out on our Instagram page, but we are not delve more into this right now because we want to cover for the rest of the session. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide and look at what are arguments. Before even going on to what an argument is, Avira, you can stop sharing right now and let's ask the people who are there in the session. So if you have an answer and what do you think an argument is, a proper definition or even a few words, please raise your hand because you want to know what you think an argument is first before we directly give you the answer on what a proper argument in a debate looks like so that we have an idea of what your previous knowledge of argumentation is. So I'll share my whiteboard. And if you have an answer, please raise your hand. If you do not participate, that is unfortunately your own loss for you, because to become a better debater, you will need to participate a lot. And for doing MUNs as well, you will need to speak up. So please, whatever answer you have, just raise your hand and we'll take you up for what you think an argument is. Okay, I see Tavish on my screen. So Tavish, go ahead and tell me what an argument is.
Hey, Shivansh.
Yeah.
So I think an argument is a conflict of different perspectives on a given topic.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just know that.
Yes, a logical conflict, fact-based conflict on different perspectives of an argument of a topic.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. And Manan and Avira, keep admitting people in because they're coming on my screen and I don't want to waste that time. I'll instead take in responses from other people during then. Yeah, Lavi, go ahead. Good to see you.
So I believe it's like an informal discussion, which involves two opposite. It's rather gives two opposite views on a certain topic.
Okay, perfect. So pretty similar, different perspective here. We have now specifically two opposite views. All right, we'll take one last response. Araf, go ahead.
What I generally think is it's not exactly a conflict. It's just putting forward your own views, which are generally thought to be different from the other people, not exactly your opponents.
Okay, awesome. So something different we got from Araf, and I think he's getting closer. I just want to see where this goes. So this is the closest response we've gotten, by the way, to what an argument is. These are all good responses. You're trying to give whatever you think a definition of an argument is. And in a debate, you have to support a side, irrespective. So it's good you're trying to think of something. It's very good that you're trying to make something out of some word that you've not heard before or trying to make some form of definition of it. But this is the closest response we've got it till now. So let's take one last person and see if we get anything closer, and then we'll explain and look at what you guys said and what we think an argument actually means. So I'll take one from Tia. What do you think an argument is?
I think an argument is discussion between two or more people regarding different opinions or statements and putting forward your opinion which is better regarding that statement.
Okay, got it. Opinion. So very similar. I think we can leave it at that. You guys can lower your hands. We'll not take in more responses for now. Obviously, we'll have more questions and we'll do a proper drill as well. So don't worry about that. But let's go through this and what we think. So this is a good bunch of responses, right? I think we have confused ourselves with what we think a debate is and what an argument is. Because yesterday also we asked the same question, what is a debate? And you guys gave the same response. It's a conflict between two perspectives. So these are definitions of what a debate is. Argument is not a conflict. Argument is the reason on why you support a particular side. It's not a conflict because a conflict would come if there are two arguments inherently in a debate from two different sides. Then we call it a conflict. In debate terms, we actually call it a clash, not a conflict. But you can call it a conflict for now. But a conflict is not an argument. Argument is just a reason supporting a particular side. A conflict is a clash where there are two or more arguments that differ from each other that exist in a debate. So arguments are just reasons. A conflict would be having two or more arguments in a particular given debate. So this is more of a definition of what a debate is. Similarly, this is, I think, literally the definition of a debate, an informal discussion where you have, debate is more formal, so we can remove this informal part. A debate is a formal discussion where you have two opposite views. That's a debate, not an argument. So just clarify that and just be a little more clear on that. Good responses, though. You're trying to think of what an argument is and you're trying to make out. And in debate, most of the topics that we're given, just for your knowledge and information, and most questions that you answer on spot, all of us aren't knowledgeable about everything in the world. We don't know what's the state of Israel right now. Nobody knows what's actually happening in Israel. And probably no one would know the same response for what is happening in the economic conditions of the United States. Nobody can have all the information at once. So at points, we have to reasonably use our own logic and intuition to make an argument and give some sort of reason for something in a debate, which we may not have full information about. And so the same skill is being used here, where you guys are trying to give me a definition of what an argument is without actually knowing what an argument is. And it's good you're trying to create some form of a definition, because this is literally what you have to do in debates as well. You have to think in a similar way. But the closest response we got from Arav was putting forward your own views. And then we got this from Tia as well. You put your own opinion as well. And this is literally what an argument is. This is the closest thing we get to an argument as from the responses you guys gave us, which is your own view. But just note that this is not what you think. This is what your side thinks on the given topics. So don't give me your own view in a debate. Obviously, if you're given a particular country in an MUN, or if you're given a particular side in an MUN or in a debate, then you obviously support that side and you obviously support that like stance that you're given. So this is not what you think personally, but this is what your side or your country thinks for the debate that is given. But it is your own views. The reason why this is especially important is because views is kind of similar to belief, and all beliefs are based on some form of rationality or logic, which you think is right. And it is that like rationality and logic that makes your belief true to you. And so the reason why views are specifically important over here is because an argument, like I said at the start, is a reason. And so once you give a couple of reasons to support a particular claim or an idea, that is what we call a view. So let me make this clear. A view is nothing but a bunch of, let me just put that here, a bunch of reasons that come under a specific idea. And that is what we call a view. And the same definition can be applied for an argument, where you can say an argument is just a collection of different kinds of views as well. And so in simple terms, an argument is just a reason for supporting or opposing a particular side. And an argument generally comes under a specific idea. We'll talk about what this idea is. In debate, we call this an idea a claim. In rationality, logic, in all philosophy, every time you try to say something, you're probably making a claim. And a claim is something that's so formal. Obviously, in real life, when we make claims in debates, it is a little more formal. But whenever you try to make a claim, you probably have done this at any point in your life. When you're talking to someone, you're trying to talk about or persuade someone, you probably make a claim from your own side, from your own view, from your own rationality, and that is still a claim. So a claim is nothing but you saying, I want to particularly support this side, and you give a reason for that side. That acts as a claim. And then a claim has to be backed up by additional logical reasons, which is what makes the claim a proper argument. And so, again, in simple terms, an argument is nothing but a reason to support a particular side. And that group of reasons is what we call a view or your view. And we'll specifically talk about what this view is, but good responses from everyone. So I hope that is clear. Again, if you have any questions, we will take that up at the end, but please feel free to put it up in chat if you have a very urgent question, and someone from our team will answer over there in chat as well. Yes, so we can go back to presenting the PPT and we can move to the next slide. Yeah, and so here what we have given, you can go back. So we, I think you're moving forward. Yeah, just go back. Perfect. So here we've given on our slide what we ideally want you to think of as a definition for an argument. And don't try to memorize this, or like there will be it's not going to be a test or anything on this. The reason why we are telling you what an argument is so that you're clear on what you're actually doing when you're making an argument. In no format of debates and MUNs will they ever ask you to tell you the definition of what an argument is, or will they ever ask you for a definition of an argument, but they'll ask you to apply this in some form of a context or some form of a debate. And if you understand what an argument actually looks like and what it means to make an argument, you will better be able to apply it in the context, which is why we first start with even understanding what even actually is an argument, before just going on to making arguments in the first place. So here it says an argument is a logical, well-explained statements, a series of well-explained statements made by an individual to support and oppose an idea that must have some conclusion and a comparative. So let's look at the specific words in this that we've highlighted, right? Logical, I think everybody understands. It has to be in a coherent logical flow. That means it has to make sense, i.e. you say A occurs, so let's say you make the claim A, right? We think, so if you have a topic, let's say the death penalty should be abolished because we think it should be abolished because victims, because we don't want to be as bad as the criminal. We don't want to do as much of the harm as the criminal has done by killing the criminal itself, right? That's probably why we want to abolish. Or let's go to an easier argument. Let's say, why should the death penalty exist? Probably because maybe it can reduce crime rates, because death penalty is such a scary, strong thing that people don't want to commit crimes like murder or rape anymore because you don't want to be given the death penalty. So one argument can be that the death penalty should exist because it can reduce crime rates. Now, my claim here is we reduce crime rates. That's the claim, right? Now, to prove the claim that death penalty can reduce crime rates, I need to prove from what the death penalty does to reducing crime rates. There's a big bunch of logical sequence of statements that has to come at this claim, right? So whatever topic that is given to you in an MUN or in a debate, and the argument you make, they still have a blank line of reasoning that has to be given to actually connect the topic to the argument. And that is what we call a logical sequence. And that's why the first and most important word in understanding what an argument is that it has to be logical, which means, okay, the death penalty exists. That leads to probably something happening, that leads to something else happening, and that leads to crime rates reducing. So for example, and to just make this super clear, the death penalty exists. It's an institution of fear. Fear is generally stopping us from doing crimes. So even to make it even more specific, you can say the death penalty exists. Because of the death penalty, the fear comes that you will be given death if you do a crime of such high order. This means people are less incentivized to even go ahead and do crimes like murder and rape because they know that they can die. This means that the amount of crimes that might happen because of rape and murder actually decline because people are scared. And so my end conclusion or my claim that crime rates reduce is proof, because I went through a series of logical statements from the death penalty existing to crime rates reducing, and I explain why this is true based on these logical statements. I hope that's clear. That's very important. That is what it means to make a logical statement. And obviously the second word is well explained. This is what it means to make it well explained, i.e. don't just say like, oh, the death penalty is there, death penalty is scary, and so crime rates reduce. That's not a good argument. You just like made it very intuitive for you. Obviously it's scary for you, but you have to think of it from the stakeholder you're actually affecting. Why is it scary for a criminal, right? Because of someone, most criminals and most crimes occur out of poverty. Most crimes occur, and most crimes occur because you don't have like, most crimes occur out of like bad circumstances. And so people living generally like in a bad circumstance are more likely to do things like murder or rape than just individuals who are educated, who are liberal, because obviously they don't want to go ahead and be jailed for doing something like a murder or rape or any kind of these high order crimes, right? And so you can't just say that because the death penalty is scary, crime rates will reduce. You have to say, why is the death penalty specifically scary to criminals who might exist in like poor, high crime neighborhoods, or who might exist in like bad circumstances? And why is it specifically deterring those kind of criminals from doing crimes like murder and rape? Because they know that they can actually be punished by the death penalty. So that is what it means to make it well explained, to make it specific to the argument you're making, to make it specific to the context you're making, and more importantly, to give multiple reasons under what you're saying. Don't give one reason. One reason is never enough in a debate. And the problem with giving one reason is, even if you think that reason is absolutely amazing, like for me to go ahead and say the death penalty reduces crime because it is scary, it's a fair reason. It still makes sense that it is scary. So it's probably why people are going to do less crimes. But someone can easily rebut one line of reasoning because there's nothing else to rebut. They can prove why it's not scary. They can probably go ahead and say that people, even if people don't do crimes like murder and rape, they will still do other crimes because obviously other crimes are still not given death penalty, right? Like death penalty is so far and so like less proximate to people. People are going to go ahead and do more crimes like robbery or like assault because you still won't be given death penalty in that. So crime rates don't actually reduce even if you put up the death penalty. So because I just gave one reason, it can easily be responded to. It can easily be rebutted by some other delegate or some other debater in an actual debate, which is why we tell you give multiple reasons. Okay, maybe one reason was that the death penalty is scary because it can lead to death. The second reason is the death penalty is scary because of some other reason, right? If you give multiple reasons, it's harder for the opposing side to go ahead and try to refute that because they have to refute multiple reasons for your actual claim to be broken, for your actual argument to be broken, which is why we tell you make it well explained, give multiple reasons so that it's harder for your opponent to take it down in a debate or even in an MUN. Okay, so that's what an argument is. And the last thing I want to just cover in this is that it has to be comparative. Comparative basically means, and it says in the last statement of the slide as well, arguments, debates don't exist in a vacuum. What does this mean? Before I even like answer this, does anyone know what comparative means? Just think of the English word comparative. What do you think comparative means? And we can stop sharing because I know what the slide is about. So Avira, you can stop sharing. Yeah. Does anyone know what comparative means, or just think what do you think comparative means? And we'll try to take in from new people. So please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll call on you and we'll ask you to answer. But it's better if you raise your hand. And we're noting it down as well who's raising their hand, who's not. For us, for our own records as well. Okay. I'll take one from Tavish. Go ahead.
Well, I think obviously it means in comparison to something else or some different factor.
Okay, fair. That's the definition of comparative. Quite intuitive. Let's take one from. Oh, I thought Kanak was raising her hand. You can raise your hand again. Was it the same response? Okay, no worries. We'll take from someone else. We'll take from Misha. Go ahead.
Comparative is basically describing a difference between two perspectives or two points of views.
Okay, fine. You guys are thinking of what comparative means in English terms. Good, we've moved past that. Think of now what comparative means in a debate. If you were in a debate against another side, if you were as an MUNer, as a delegate against like a bunch of other countries, when I tell you be comparative as the judge or as the chair, what does that mean? Adit?
I believe that comparative means that you take many views into consideration. You just not take one view, you take two views and you compare which one makes more sense to you.
Okay, that's very close. And Pujana, go ahead.
Judging the other debates, meaning other two different views.
Okay. I think that is also very close. So I'll tell you what comparative means. Comparative means, and like what all of you said, it's obviously comparing, but it means being fair and trying to meaningfully run a debate from your side by proving why your side is uniquely better than the other side. That is what it means to be comparative. For example, if you're giving any argument, always, whenever you give an argument, you have to consider if this argument does exist in my side of the debate, how is this better than the other side? This seems like very logically intuitive whenever I'm giving an argument. Obviously, if I'm giving an argument in support of my side, it has to be better than the other side, right? But in a debate and an MUN, if you don't say this out explicitly, nobody can credit you for it. So the most logically obvious things, even something as similar as a comparative and something as simple as just simply stating, okay, on our side of the world, because death penalty is so fearful, it's so scary, crime rates reduce because people are less likely to now go ahead and do crimes of murder and of rape and high order crimes because it is just scary to be given the idea of being killed, to be given such a high order punishment that you are given death, that people are less likely to do it. So on our side, when you have the death penalty, people do lesser crimes like murder and rape versus, and now this is the comparative when I tell that on their side, when they don't have the death penalty existent, people are free to go ahead and do crimes like murder or rape because they know they can still fall back into things like rehabilitation or other forms of punishment that is not as scary as the death penalty, because obviously humans are far more scared of death because it is a sudden shock kind of thing that you're given to yourself. And obviously, all social cultural norms tell us that death is scary. Everything, like, people are generally more scared of death than they are as of like imprisonment in jails, or being, or not even being scared of like something like rehabilitation, right? And so death is just far more scary, and that is why on our side people are less likely to do crimes than on their side, because on their side, if they don't have death penalty, they're probably going to have rehabilitation, they're probably going to have something like life imprisonment, and that is just isn't as scary as death itself. So people will still do crimes like murder and rape on their side of the debate, or on whichever delegate you're targeting in an MUN. This means whenever I just say set on their side, and I'm just trying to create some form of like comparison, trying to weigh it out on what our side gives you and what their side gives you. Think of it like a scale, right? A balancing scale. You probably would have seen in physics classes where you're trying to measure and balance weight, right? On one side, you're trying to prove that your side is better. On the other side, you're trying to prove that their side is worse. You have to measure the scale. And in a debate, you literally have to say the scale and explicitly like describe the scale on why your side is just balancing on top more than the other side, and their harms are far worse. So explicitly stating out your comparative is very, very important in an argument itself, because what happens worst case, right? What if we don't do this? What if we don't give you a comparative? What will then happen is that my argument will just exist in a vacuum. It means that, okay, the debate topic is there, my argument is there, but that argument has no meaning. It's useless, it is not meaningful, it's irrelevant, because if that argument is not challenging a side, then that argument is not debating a debate, because that argument does not exist in a debate. What this means is, if there is no argument against any other side, if there is no other side, then the argument has no purpose. So you have to actually explicitly challenge the other side for that argument to make sense. Otherwise, you're not actually doing a debate. You're just giving a public speech on one side of a topic without actually being a debater or an MUNer, even in your mod caucuses, unmod caucuses. That's why we tell you respond to other delegates. And even before responding, this is the first line of response, just be comparative. That is what it means to be comparative. If you have any other questions on this, again, put it in chat. Otherwise, we'll take it later as well. Keep noting it down. And hopefully you guys have a debate notebook. We told this to the people who came in yesterday, about 200 people, actually 300 people came in yesterday. But we told every one of them to keep their debate notebooks on, because everything we're giving here is very, very useful. Most of the information will not be written in the slides because it's very hard for us to explain stuff from slides. And that's why I'm directly explaining it to you. So please note down the explanations. They're far more important than taking a screenshot of the slide. But more importantly, debates are run physically now. All MUNs and debates are becoming more and more in person. You have to build the skill of writing down quickly. You have to build the skill of writing speeches down in a minute, in 2 minutes, because that will be done offline as well. Avira has experience with that. A lot of people from our own team debater know that all of these debates and MUNs are becoming offline. So please have notebooks that you can write your debate notes in. Anyways, we can move back to the slide. If there are no questions, let's go ahead and come back to the slides. Awesome. So now let's move on to the types of arguments that we have. We have two basic types of arguments in most debates that are run. The first type of an argument is a practical argument, and second one is principle. I wanted to switch this. In our slides, this should have been first principle, then practical. But I want you to like think about, what do you think principle means and what do you think practical means? Obviously, it's given in a slide, but I want you to give me an example of what you think a principal argument would be and a practical argument would be. So again, we can stop sharing. Let's make this as interactive as possible. I'm sorry to the people who made the slides, but we want to get more people engaged in. And so let's look at a motion, right? I'll give you guys a motion in chat. We'll take a similar motion. Let's take the death penalty one. Should, and I'll put this in chat for everyone. Should the death penalty, don't mind my spelling, please. Should that penalty be abolished? I think my spelling is very bad, but I've put it up in chat. Should the death penalty be abolished? Now, what I want you to do is from proposition or opposition, whichever side you want to take, you take. Just tell me the side you're taking before you give me an idea. But I want you to tell me one practical argument and one principle argument based on whatever you think a practical principle is. Even if you read the slides, that's okay. But I just want you to give me an idea of what you think a practical or principle argument would be. So both, give me one practical and give me one principle. Anyone, just think about it, and you can take a minute. We can take a minute. We can take up to like 6:31. And you can think of an argument. You can note it down however you want to say it, but just think of one practical and one principle that you would want to run in the debate of the death penalty being abolished. Anything. So we'll take up till 6:31. It's already 6:13 now. We'll take up till 6:31, wait for your responses, and then we'll see what you think a practical principle means. And Manan, just put in the volunteer form so that they can see to volunteer how they can volunteer with us and how to work with us. In case you don't know, a lot of the people in the session right now are also working with us. Avira is working with us. Manan is working with us. Akshay, who just joined in, is working with us. So a lot of people in the session and who are bringing this session to you are working with us. It's only prepared by a bunch of teenagers. So if you want to also come and work with us, share your debate and any knowledge, please fill in the form. They'll come to you in chat. I think Manan will just send it across. It's the volunteer form. It's also in our Instagram bio, but it's a good idea if you fill that form in, and you can always join our team and work with us as well. All right, it's going to be 6:31 in 10 seconds. We'll wait up till 10. It is almost there. Okay, cool. I gave you full time because you will also be given full time in a debate anyways. But let's take arguments for people who haven't. Avira, I'll take yours at the end because you're experienced and you are working with a team debater. So let's take it from someone else first. Myra, give us what you think a practical and a principle would be and tell me the side you're supporting.
So I'm supporting the for side. So death penalty should be abolished.
Okay.
My practical argument is that if a person is convicted and is given the death penalty, but the case is later reopened and the person is proven to be innocent, a death penalty is not a punishment that you can reverse. So the person's life is gone. There's no way of reverting the punishment given, and there's no way of the person getting redemption for what they've done and the fact that they've been wrongly convicted.
Okay. And a principle?
Principal argument is according to morals, I'm assuming. So killing in general, killing of a person in general is bad and shouldn't be there because honestly, if somebody performs a crime, or if someone is deemed a criminal, giving them the same punishment would technically deem you a criminal too, because you're doing the same thing as them.
Okay, fair. Those are both good arguments. I think the principle one is identified correctly. The correct principle in this debate from the for side, as Myra said, is that death itself is a bad thing. We should not be killing people, and that giving like some form of retribution by death is just a bad thing in general, because even if someone killed you or someone killed a lot of other people, we shouldn't be the same prosecutors as society and kill them at the end, because what will make us different from them? So that's a good principle that you've identified of, i.e. like the idea of death and us giving them the death and doing the same thing that the criminal did. I think the practical argument is a little weaker on being able to prove why death penalty would be given to people like falsely and why they'll be imprisoned falsely. In specific, this probably won't occur in more like Western liberal democracies, like in the US or in more such Western liberal democracies. It's probably harder because cases would be more stricter over there, and the way the democracy functions, the amount of resources they have, and the amount of time they spend on cases is probably more than they would in a developing country or a less developed country, like probably some country in like the Middle East, or a country in like Africa. Having the death penalty will have a far lesser amount of prosecution being done than a death penalty being occurring in the United States. So probably in those kind of developing countries is where like false imprisonment is most likely to occur. So that is something that should have been mentioned in the argument. Another thing that could have been mentioned in the argument is why would false imprisonment even occur, right? Think of the government, think of the kind of governments that exist. In a state where the government is only supporting a particular type of gender or a particular type of, this won't exist in terms of gender, but this will most likely exist in terms of religion or caste or specific race of people. Then the government, if the government has a lot of control and power, is an authoritarian government, or generally has a lot of influence in the state, probably also has influence over the judiciary system and the legal system, which means the government is the person who's appointing who the judges are. The government has probably bribed the judges who are there and judging the case of death penalties. And so, insofar as that is true, the government can choose who they want to prosecute and remove and ethnically like cleanse people out by using the death penalty as a powerful tool to do that. For example, if the current government in power in a certain state X, I won't name a state right now because I don't want any trouble to come to our organization, but let's take any state X which has the government in power, and they support like particularly A kind of people. And there is a B minority that exists. So there's a state X where there's A people, that's the majority, and B people, that's the minority. Then the government of X, of state X, can use the death penalty as a tool to specifically prosecute B minorities in order to gain more popular appeal from A majorities, only benefit them, never give them the death penalty, and remove any people who are in the minority that might oppose the government later on. This is why false imprisonment can actually occur in a state if the government is legally liable for being able to implement the death penalty and the government has a lot of influence. In that case, the death penalty is bad, and the false imprisonment argument is very much true on practical grounds. I was just giving feedback on the argument. Obviously, the argument can be improved. There are multiple strands that can come in the argument, but the main idea from this, from what Myra gave, is a good example of what a practical is and what a principle is. She gave a good principle of death and why death is a bad thing and why we shouldn't be prosecuting death as much as the criminal did the same thing by killing someone else, and a practical as well, which is on false imprisonment. So the idea was practical arguments are more on-ground impacts, tangible impacts that we can measure, like we can definitely measure false imprisonments, deaths, etc. Principal arguments we can't measure. We can't measure the inherent human principle of why death itself is a bad thing. And just note, neither, like insofar like everything that Myra was telling in her entire argument for principle, it had no practical impacts. She just said it's bad to kill a person because it's just bad to kill. No practical reasons why. Like, she didn't say that, okay, maybe having the death penalty could have stopped crimes. Maybe it can save a lot of people. Doesn't matter, right? All she said was that it's just bad to kill people, which means she didn't consider the practical impacts at all. She only just based her argument off the moral idea of killing someone, and that's a principal argument. And there are specific principles that we list in a debate for you to run, right? There's a principle called principle of justice, wherein if someone has done some X action, we should give them the same punishment as that X action deserves because of justice. There's a principle of eye for an eye, similarly running the same front, right? There's a principle of reparations. If Britain, for some reason, had done colonialism on India, then Britain should still pay back reparations in some of the other kind because they harmed India to the same extent. For example, if Britain looted like $100,000 from India because of colonialism, they looted far more. The statistics are already up. It's in like trillions of dollars. But still, if they looted like 100,000 rupees, they should give back 100,000 rupees back. That's the principle of reparation. And there are many other principles that we can run in debates. But this is a general idea that irrespective of the practical reason or practical benefit that we will get out of the argument, we run the principle because we want to follow that principle as society and humans. And that's why principal arguments are separate from practical. We'll take another response for the same debate, and hopefully you guys have a different argument. Please give me a different argument, and don't raise your hand if it's the exact same thing, because we don't want to waste time. So we'll take it from someone new. Avira will come to you at the end. Let's take one from Vidushi. We didn't see you answer. So go ahead and give us what you think practical and principle would be in this argument, a debate, and your side as well.
Okay, so for my practical argument, first of all, I am for that the death penalty should be abolished.
Okay.
For the practical argument, I would say that to some extent, the death penalty is still arbitrary because even though there are established rules, the reasons change the extent of the punishment. And thus, the death penalty could be influenced by the judge's biases, whether it be religious or related to gender or color. And for my principal argument, I would say that rather than giving a death penalty, our systems should focus on the rehabilitation of these people and should focus on making them better citizens that could contribute to society. Thank you.
And is that your principal argument?
Yes.
Okay. So I think like I'm not sure what the principle on like going ahead and giving rehabilitation is, because I think that's still a practical. I'm sure everybody would understand why that is a practical, that if the death penalty is abolished, the most likely counterfactual or the most likely opportunity cost that we're losing with the death penalty currently today is rehabilitation, or is like some other form of punishment like life imprisonment. And that's also a practical impact. If you want to run as a principle, you have to prove why in general having like no death, the principle is still no death, right? You're not changing the principle. In this debate, there's ideally only one big principle, which Myra pointed out, of having no death. You can prove this principle in multiple ways. from the line of reasoning that we just got from you, where we can like go ahead and say that maybe no death is better because we have other opportunities and alternatives like rehabilitation and life imprisonment, and why on principle life imprisonment or a specific alternative like rehabilitation is better. So the principle doesn't change. Just keep that in mind, that practical arguments will change, but ideally in a debate there won't be as many principles because there are only certain moral obligations that we have to a topic versus the amount of practical impacts that are there, vast diversity spread in the world that can occur because of a debate existing. So the principle remains the same. The principle is still of no death. And on your practical argument where the judge might be influenced by something or by race, religion, caste, etc., I think that's very similar to the false imprisonment argument I told you, wherein like in certain states, in certain countries where the government has a lot of control or the people are just not educated enough, there it can be a chance where the government or the person, like the judge in power, may falsely imprison a person because they might want to specifically target a minority group, they might want to specifically target a specific kind of people, because the government has instructed them to do so, or they have their own biases, etc. But this generally does not occur in the death penalty kind of a debate, unless you prove it to be only in like developing countries. But overall, if you again want to run this an argument, then please mention that this will occur in developing countries or in these specific type of states. Don't generalize and say that, okay, tomorrow every judge in the world is going to specifically target a minority and put them in the death penalty, because note that criminal justice systems are very, very complicated. They go through a very rigorous procedure, and it isn't easy to put someone on the death row. So as much as it is easy for us to today like talk about things like the death penalty, please just be a little more sensitive on like, it is very, very, very much a big deal when you put someone on the death penalty. And the thing is, a case for a death penalty can last for 10, 20 years. If you just look at like any case of the death penalty, even in India, the fact that you're giving someone the death penalty allows for the government, and there are legal obligations of the government to allow for repeals and like appeals on the death penalty to come in for 10, 20 years. And the case can be fought for 10, 20 years before you actually reach a final conclusion. So it's not easy to put a person on the death penalty. And it's not as easy as you think that I can just falsely imprison any person randomly walking on the road and just say, okay, you're now on the death row because I wanted to put the death penalty, right? So just keep that in mind. It's not as easy. So the likelihood of that argument existing might be a little less, because people just generally don't put people on the death penalty that easily. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, that requires some background knowledge, but the more debate you do on this, the easier you'll understand. We have spent a lot of time on this, so we'll take up responses later. Avira, we can take up your response for something else. I know you have a ton of arguments, but you're working with us, so that's kind of unfair to the people. So we'll take up your responses later. But I got a question, and I think this is a very important question, Kanak, where you are asking the difference between principle and practical. The examples we gave were also like highlighting the differences, but we'll just come to the exact difference right now. We'll share the slide and we'll tell you the difference. So Avira, yeah, just share the slide. Yeah. So here is the difference of what ideally a principle and practical argument is. Just note, in all of your MUNs and the debates that you will be doing, in most debates, just like 2v2 debates between two teams, can you run a principal argument? In an MUN, don't run a principal argument because countries don't have principles. So when you are an MUNer or a delegate, you usually run all arguments as practical arguments because you're thinking of a specific country. The only time you use principles as a country is to support that country's foreign policy or stance. For example, if you want to support, let's say, the foreign policy of a specific country like the US, currently the US will, I mean, that happens, that depends on the like the result of the elections. But let's say Trump wins, then the US becomes more Republican, the US becomes far more conservative, and we are moving towards a right-wing United States, right? That means the principles that the United States will follow will be more conservative, will be more right-wing. If you guys don't know what conservative means, it's generally like more nationalistic policies, more policies where you want like policies that support getting immigrants out of your country, or policies that support for like protecting your own domestic country, your own country itself. Anything that supports like nationalism, patriotism is generally right-wing and conservative, versus supporting freedom for everyone and giving everyone rights, allowing for all minorities, all majorities to exist in a similar state. That is liberalism, and ideally like left-wing. So the United States, if Trump becomes in power, because Trump's from the Republican Party and those aligned with right-wing views and conservative ideals will probably follow conservative principles. So if you're a delegate in an MUN representing the United States with the current power having like Trump as its president, you probably want to support right-wing ideals, and you want to give out policies, solutions, talk about problems that are more right-wing or deal with right-wing ideas. And that's when you will use principles for an MUNer, for a delegate. But in a debate, in an actual debate, which is just a 2v2 debate, There you won't use a principle as just like, okay, I support like conservative ideas or something like that. You actually have to explain why that principle is true. So for what we got for the death penalty one, where having no death is a very important principle, that's not something you will run as a country. That's definitely an actual argument you will make as a debater. But in MUN, you don't have to make an argument out of a principle. It's just some beliefs you have to follow. And that's why we still want to highlight the difference between principle and practical, because in an MUN, a principle is just beliefs you have to follow as a country. In a debate, a principle is an argument itself. Practical, on the other hand, as we told you, is something on ground that is actually having some tangible impact, does something. And as it says on the slide, is usually pros and cons. So pros for a certain topic, cons for a certain topic. And most intuitively, the first argument you will always think of in any debate will be practical, because it's harder for us to conceptualize principal arguments because they're harder to be like manifested in the real world. What that means is, as humans and as normal people, we can't think of principles that easily, because principles just don't exist in the real world. We cannot see them, and they're very abstract. They're very like in the mind, and we can't just see them directly. Versus practicals, you probably have seen some example in the news, something happening in the real world that can explain a practical. And so the argument that you will like most likely intuitively get will most probably be a practical argument, and that can easily help you identify what is a practical argument. Principal argument, again, on the other hand, are arguments based on like any moral idea, arguments based on just any like moral principle in the first place. And those kind of arguments don't have any certain like certain kind of practical impacts that we want to measure on ground. And so in general, when you look at like principal arguments, the most important thing here is that the principle will be held true irrespective of having like any kind of practical impact of the principle. And so we will like in a debate value a principle irrespective of any practical impact. So we gave this example yesterday also, where we told everyone that in a debate when we say like all humans should die, we would say like a principle can exist where like there is just a principle obligation for us to just have no humans existing. Like all humans should cease to exist. And there is a very good principle argument to this, that humanity existing itself is a burden to the world and all of those kind of stuff that can exist irrespective of the practical impact. So you can very much run a principle argument, and irrespective of that argument or the debate where you say like, if humans don't exist tomorrow, there might be like environmental problems will become far worse. Nobody will lead to like the development of like the earth, or we can't go and explore space and do beneficial stuff to the world, etc. Stuff like that. There are always like good practical impacts for humanity to exist, right? And we lose all of those practical impacts when I just tell you that all humans should die. But if I tell you that the principle of all humans dying is just far more important than any practical impact, you will value the principle more. And in debate, in general, like all debates, we tell you that principles are always weighed more than any practical impact of an argument. And so just keep this in your mind. If you're running a principle and if you explain a principle very, very, very well, then you will win the debate from the principle itself, irrespective of the practical argument that you will get. And so just keep that in mind, that all principles are weighed more than practicals, and all principles are just logically prior, because we humans, we value principles more than we value any practical impact. And principles exist without any practical impacts. In debate terms, what we call this, and I'll put this in chat, it is known as non-consequentialist. Let me just put non-consequentialist. This means if I say an argument is non-consequentialist, it means that the argument exists irrespective of its consequences. Most principles then are non-consequentialist. That means principles exist irrespective of their practical impacts, irrespective of the practical consequences. The moment you get this, you will win debates from the principle itself. Always, what will happen in most cases is almost always you will run practicals, because it's harder to explain a principle. It's far more obvious to run a practical. But once you like, we will do sessions on principles, by the way. We'll give you a list of different principles you can run in different debates. Once you understand them well, you will please, like, you should ideally be running a principle argument more than a practical one, because you can win debates from just a principle. Principles are weighed more in a debate than a practical, and the order of an argument is always a principle first, then a practical. And that's why like we weigh principles more, because morals are far more important to people. So in general debates, if you do debates, you figure out that you can win from principles easily than practicals. It's just that it's harder to run principles. That's why most debaters still run practical arguments and not principles. I hope that makes the difference between principles and practical arguments clear. That's an important difference to identify and understand, because the arguments you will be running will either fall into these two categories. There's nothing apart from this. I mean, all arguments have some impact, so they either become practical, and if they have no impact, then they're highly likely to become principles, because they're just abstract concepts that exist, that we want to believe in and we value, rather than any impact of those concepts in the real world. And so those are the definitions of practical and principal arguments. We can move to the next slide. So obviously, I explained that practical arguments, why we generally focus on practicals more in debate is because, and right now we're going to focus more on them, is because it's easier to materialize, because it's easier to make sense out of practical arguments, because it comes in the real world. It's easier to make. More debate skills can be pushed because you have to think more for giving a lot of good reasons for a practical argument. You can give many reasons in a practical argument. In a principle, you may be able to hardly give like 2 or 3 reasons, because it's harder to actually make like principal arguments, and there are only 2-3 reasons that exist for a principle. But for a practical in general, you can give many arguments and many reasons for just one practical argument, because you can see that in the real world, you know more about a practical argument, and you can intuitively just figure out more for a practical. And also the scope for practical is far more because it is less abstract. And so insofar as that is true, there are more debate skills you can push for in practical arguments, which is why we want to focus on them more. And lastly, it's more intuitive. Manan, please put the volunteer form in chat as well. I don't see that going. Yeah, I didn't see that come in chat before. Don't put the membership one, put the volunteer one, so that these people can volunteer to work with us as well if they want to. And if you want to lead a debate session with us, if you want to give a session about something else that you know, something you might be an expert in, you can be an expert in a couple of different topics related to debates or MUNs. We would love to have you here and give a session to everyone else. I mean, it's great to spread knowledge, and it's only better for us to get more people who come here and give more information to other people. So the volunteer form has been sent in chat. Please just click on that and you can volunteer and to work with us anyways at any time. Let's move to the next thing, which is the 7 steps on making an argument. This is the structure of how you make an argument, what consists of an argument, and how do you actually frame an argument. What we got right now from people and what they were answering were just giving me one-liner statements, which is like, you give me a claim and you give me one reason why you support that claim. You give me a statement and you give me one reason why you support that statement. That is a good way to make to start with arguments as a beginner, but there's a proper structure that can help you give out arguments in a better way to your judge, to your chair, and more importantly, give out more nuances, give out more information in the argument, because this specific structure that we're going to give you now pushes you to think more and give a better, more well-explained and analyzed argument for your debates. So let's move to the next slide, and let's look at the 7 steps on how you make an argument. So the basic 7 steps for an argument start here, as you can see in the slide. We've named them as specific steps. Please write this down, and honestly, please memorize this, because the more you actually know this and the more clear this is in your mind, the easier it will be for you to make arguments in a debate on spot, or make arguments for some side on spot in a given topic. Now, for all the MUNers that are there in the session, the reason why I'm telling you this, and this is very important for your MUNs as well, is because a lot of times, if you're in a moderated caucus, you may not know or have enough information about the moderated caucus. You might be in a moderated caucus where you would have not prepared for, because chances are there are 50 to 100 delegates that are having like different topics as a whole, and someone else's delegate's moderated topic can be actually passed in the moderated caucus. And then now you have to debate on a topic that you have not prepared at all for as your country, but you have to give something, because you don't want to be left in a situation where you don't speak at all, right? So if you get a moderate caucus topic in an MUN where you have absolutely no idea what to say because you've not done any research, that's why making an argument is important, because you can very well make an argument without having any information from before. You can make arguments without doing any research, because arguments are just reasons why you support a certain side. You don't need to do research to make an argument. It's just logical. You just have to think of what can happen in the real world. The way that Myra made an argument on false imprisonment, the way other people in this entire session made an argument on why certain sides should be supported in a certain way, and the way you guys made an argument, I'm sure you guys didn't have to research extensively, and these arguments are very intuitively obvious. False imprisonment in death penalty is very obvious. Obviously, because it is a crime that is being punished, there can be a case where it is punished wrongly or wrongfully, right? There can be a case where you're imprisoning someone or you're giving someone death penalty by mistake, accidentally, without analyzing the case properly. In those cases, you don't need to research enough about the death penalty to make an argument like that. You can make that intuitively. Similarly, in an argument, in an MUN, if you understand how to make an argument, you will be able to make them on any moderated caucus topic without having information about that mod caucus topic, because you don't need to know extensively about a topic to make an argument, because most arguments are very logical and you can make sense out of them easily. So let's look at the 7 steps then. The first step is the title, and we've put this as claim, warrant, and impact to make this a little more easier and simple for you guys to understand. But don't focus on the claim, warrant, and impact part right now. We'll explain this later on. If in case the 7 steps are a little more complicated for you, then you can use the claim, warrant, and impact. But we recommend you to use the 7 steps, because the more you fall into these 7 steps, the better, more well analyzed your argument will be. The more reasons you can put into an argument, and the easier it is for your judge to understand your argument, the more specific you make it. For example, if you go ahead and specifically talk about a specific type of argument, if you go ahead and specifically talk about like a specific problem under an argument, then you will be able to better explain that argument rather than just going ahead and saying claim, warrant, and impact. That is far harder to understand for a judge because it's just more vigor. And that's why we tell you to follow a specific 7-step rather than going ahead and just saying claim, warrant, and impact. So let's look at this. The first one obviously here is title. Title is your claim. Title means, for example, let's say the motion is, should the death penalty be abolished? If you're on the for side, an easy way to make your title would be, the death penalty should be abolished because, and whatever comes out of because is your title. Or the death penalty should not be abolished because, and whatever comes after because is your argument title for the opposition. So you can always make like the best argument possible from like any kind of title that you want to give in an argument by just using the statement, writing because afterwards, and then writing the argument statement itself. So that's how you make a title. Very simple, not very hard. Just write the statement itself, whatever the debate motion topic is. So again, in the case of death penalty, the death penalty should be abolished because, and write whatever you want after that. That's your argument title. So let me just put that in chat for you. The death penalty should be abolished because, and I'm putting dashes here because you know that you replace the dashes with the title. So the death penalty should be abolished because, so the death penalty should be abolished because it may lead to accidental death penalties. Or the death penalty should be abolished because the system can still lead to accidental death penalties. So the false imprisonments in the system is the title of your argument that you can run in the debate. And so whatever comes after dashes, like whatever comes after the because in the dash will be the title of your argument. The death penalty should be abolished because dash, whatever you put there, that's your title. The second thing is problem. So problem is the way you explain your title. What is the current problem in the world that you want to solve? So every debate topic will have some problem. Debates only exist because there are some problems you want to solve, right? And an argument exists because an argument is a way to solve a problem or way to prove that a problem cannot be solved by doing a certain action. So that's why we say all debates are made. Isn't the title the headline of the topic? The title is not the heading of the topic in particular. The title is the heading of the argument. So the title won't be death penalty should be abolished. The title would be false imprisonment or false usage of death penalty. Wrongful use of death penalty is a better title of the argument, because the thing is you can have multiple arguments, right? Topic is the same. Topic is death penalty. Arguments can be different because one side will argue with a title known as wrongful usage of death penalty. Another side will argue with the title used as reducing crime rates, right? So reducing crime rates is the title of your argument for supporting the side that you want to say the death penalty should not be abolished because it reduces crime rates, or the death penalty should be abolished because it might increase crime rates by existing, because the death penalty is too far for people to even conceptualize. So they still continue to do crimes like robbery and other crimes because they just don't feel as scared from the death penalty, because most people don't go into doing crimes like murders, etc. Right? And that's why it's important to separate. Title is not the same thing as the topic. Title is not death penalty. Title is the argument under the death penalty. Ultimately, an easier way to understand title is the end goal that you're trying to reach with the argument is your title. The end goal with me trying to prove that, okay, people might be killed off accidentally and they might be accused wrongly and then killed off by the death penalty. What's the end goal? The end goal is that the death penalty is actually wrongfully used, right? That's the end goal. It's used in a wrong way. So my title will be death penalty being wrongfully used, or wrongful uses of death penalty. That's your title. The end goal that you're trying to reach will be your title. Kanak has asked me a question, which is, but if we give 2-3 reasons, what would the title be? The first reason, etc. So ideally, I'll tell you that. So if you have 2 separate reasons and there are completely different reasons, then they form completely different arguments. For example, one of your reasons would have been that it that it reduces or it increases crime rates, right? Having the death penalty increases crime rates, which is why we want to abolish the death penalty. Another argument could have been having the death penalty can lead to wrongful use of the death penalty. These are 2 different arguments. One is wrongful usage and one is having crime rates increase. two different things, not all related, different reasons for each. So you want to run them as different arguments. Don't try to club it together and make it harder for the judge or the chair to understand, because the more you try to put in different reasons in one very big argument, the harder it is for the judge to get that argument, and the harder it will be for you to explain the argument as well, because you will yourself become confused. So please try to separate it. The better your structure is in a speech, the easier you'll be able to understand yourself, and the easier your judge will also understand it. Again, so the second thing is problem. All debates exist because there's a problem. So in our argument where we say the death penalty so the death penalty can be used wrongfully, right? The problem in that would be the death penalty can be used wrongfully itself. Another problem can be that in developing countries, specifically in developing countries, people may not be educated enough to be able to prosecute for death penalty. Or third, the government may be biased and the government may have specific intentions in a developing nation to be able to target specific minorities or specific voter banks that are already opposing them, or specific voter banks they want to get rid of because they don't support the current government in power. These are different problems you can run. So let's take the first problem, that the government may become too powerful, or the government may get too much authority because of the death penalty. That's a problem. So the argument was, the title of the argument is wrongful usage of the death penalty. The problem in that argument is on wrongful usage is the government gets too much power. Why is this problem likely, right? That's the third step. Why does the government get too much power? Well, the government probably gets too much power because A, the death penalty is such a strong institution that once the criminal is gone, once they're given death, they cannot come back again. So that makes the government feel more powerful. But secondly, usually in developing states, the government already has a lot of influence because the way they get power is by exploiting the uneducated, the illiterate people that exist in these kinds of developing countries in the first place. But also the government probably has a lot of influence in developing countries because rates of corruption and bribing are generally higher, because the government already has not developed as much to have checks and balances to corruption and things like that. So these are two different reasons as to why the government may get too much power and may use power wrongly. Why is the problem then bad? That's your fourth thing, right? So just note, whenever I tried to prove why is the problem likely, I did not give one reason. I gave two reasons why the problem is likely. That's very important, because in a debate, you have to push yourself to give multiple reasons why you're trying to prove something. It becomes harder for your opposing side to challenge it, because even if one of your reasons falls, the other reason still stands. So you're not losing the debate. If you only give one problem, if you only give one reason, then it's harder for you to win the debate. So even in the same argument on wrongful use of the death penalty, you can give one idea as that one wrongful way of usage of one problem might be the government might use it wrongfully. The second idea could be that people might use it wrongfully. People might specifically prosecute and target minorities now because majority people, or the people who are in the majority or support like the majority religion, may want the minority religion to get out, not exist in the country. So they will also push forward for them to be put on the death penalty and support those kind of causes more often now. So that's another problem, more different than the government problem itself. And so the idea here is that you can have multiple problems even under the same argument title. So the fourth step then was, why is the problem then bad, right? If the government uses problem wrongfully and uses the death penalty wrongfully in a bad way, then it is A, hurting the most important vulnerable people in the state, which is the minorities, and it is always putting them in wrongful accusations, putting them in power in worst cases. And secondly, it gives the government way too much power that the government thinks that they can do anything in terms of using the death penalty in bad ways. And this can lead to further implications and set a bad precedence for the legal system that might exist in the country. These are two specific reasons why this problem is bad. Then what is the solvency? Solvency is how you solve the problem. So the solvency here is just your motion, your topic in the debate is just the solvency. So directly copy paste the debate topic and that becomes the solvency here. For example, the solvency to wrongful implication of the death penalty would be the death penalty should be abolished. Whatever you're doing in the motion is your solvency. Solvency is nothing new. Don't think of this as a complicated work. Solvency means solution. Solution is the topic you're supporting. Solution is the side you're supporting. So for the for side, the solution is abolish the death penalty. For the opposition side, the solution obviously is don't abolish it, keep it existing, or they don't like really have a solution right now. And so that's your solvency, right? Then why the solvency works, which is the sixth step, is specifically connecting why the death penalty being abolished is going to solve the government not getting too much power. So you have to connect every reason that you give in your solvency to the problems that you just mentioned above. So the problem I gave above, the government gets too much power because the death penalty cannot be reversed, right? So the solvency will be if the government does not have any institutional power like the death penalty because it is abolished, the only thing the government can rely on is false imprisonment and rehabilitation, which A is not going to make the government seem that powerful, but B, it is now harder for the government to prosecute or get rid of minorities because they are not technically getting rid of them. They're still keeping them existent. They're still keeping them in power. The minority still exists. They might go into rehab. They might go into things like a false imprisonment. They might go into things like being imprisoned for life. But it is not as bad as putting them in the death jail, putting them like being killed off and not having any minority at all in your state, right? And so that's why the solvency works better when the death penalty is abolished, to specifically make the government less powerful when you have the death penalty abolished. That's specifically why the solvency of the death penalty being abolished is connecting back to the problem I gave at the start. The last thing here is comparative. Comparative just means, okay, so now that the death penalty is abolished, and assume your thing happens, and assume like the best case happens, the death penalty is abolished, all that stuff is done, and the government does not have too much power. What is the end benefit of this? The end benefit is that all the reason that you gave for the problem becoming bad at the start, so everything that you give in the fourth step now flips. So the death penalty is abolished, so minorities are better now. The death penalty is abolished, so minorities have less prosecution now. The death penalty is abolished, so the government has the government sets a good precedence for the legal system in the future. All of these are good reasons why your side is now better. So now you're comparing your side, and that's why you're creating the comparative, saying now that we've abolished the death penalty, the comparative here is that on our side, we get better rights for the minorities, and we have a better legal system, a better judicial system, because the government does not have too much power and influence, versus on their side, on comparative, they have a far worse judicial system because the government still has a lot of influence. And worst case, even if the government does not have too much power, the government still is bad for minorities because they will only target and specifically target minorities, because the government obviously knows they're not getting the voter bank from the minorities anyways. So on comparative, their side is still worse. This is where you're creating the comparative at the end of your argument. You're comparing what is the best case of the opposition side and why the best case of the opposition side is still worse in comparison to the argument that you're making and the case that you're giving. And so that is the way you create an argument. That was an example of an argument we made on death penalty motion, but I hope that it makes it a bit more clear as to how do you make an argument, what each of these steps necessarily mean, and why each of these steps are specifically important. You should remember that you can't misorder these steps in any way. A problem will always come before the solution, because it's more logically intuitive, and the problem is more important because if there is no problem, there is no debate. If there's a solution, it's as useless as the problem itself, as no problem existing, because having an injection or having a vaccine to no virus is bad, because there is no problem of a virus itself. You don't need an injection in the first place. Versus if there is a problem, then having a solution actually makes sense. So you have to remember that the order should be correct. Problem should come before the solvency itself. Otherwise, your argument will become bad. Giving just a solvency is useless, because if you don't prove that you actually have a problem in the debate that matters, that people should care about, then no judge is going to vote for you. No chair in an MUN is going to mark your argument, weigh you or weigh your speech more, because if you just randomly give out solutions to something that is not needed for a solution for anyways, then that solution is just a waste of resources, solving nothing in the first place. So please keep that in mind. That's how you make an argument. Can you please explain the solvency part again in the brief? I missed out. Okay, I'll explain that quickly. Solvency is how you solve the problem. Solvency in this fifth step means your motion itself, the topic itself. Just copy with the topic here. The death penalty being abolished is your solvency. Why the solvency works is specific reasons why using the death penalty are you able to solve the problems that you mentioned at the start. For example, the death penalty being abolished means that the government has no way of killing off minorities and getting rid of minorities directly, that cannot be reversed. And so insofar as that is true, the government does not give a lot of power, because the minorities will still continue to exist, because the government can't just kill them off now by using the death penalty or falsely imprison people that the government wants to get out of power. Like the political parties may want to falsely imprison people who may be opposing the parties. There's a very good example happening in India right now. In case you're aware, you can probably think about it. Not about the death penalty, but falsely imprisoning other political parties, etc. And so the solvency itself and why the solvency works directly connects back to your problem. And if we specifically explain why the death penalty being abolished is going to solve the problems that you mentioned at the start. I hope that's clear. Again, if you missed out, you can look back at the recording again, because we have a little bit more to cover, but that is how you make an argument, and that's how you solve the argument's problem that you mentioned at the start, and that's the structure for an argument that you should use. Comparative is the same thing that we discussed at the starting, Kanak. It's comparing your impacts, the end goal and the end impacts you get in the argument, to the other side and their best impacts. So their best impacts, would probably be, so the kind of impacts that they would get on their side would be they're still worse for minorities, and they're still worse for the government getting too much power, versus on our side, on our comparative, we have better impacts where we get better for the vulnerable minorities and better for the government having a better, more stronger judicial system. So just comparing the impacts, the end reaching of your argument, the end goals of your argument is what a comparative is. Just saying that, okay, on their side it's bad, on our side it's good, and explaining why on their side it's bad and our side it's good. That's it. That's nothing. There's nothing more in comparative. It's just to make it obvious to the judge, because if you don't say it out explicitly, it's hard for the judge to note it down in the debate. We can move to the next slide. I hope that's clear. Those are the 7 steps that you can use to make an argument. Please note this down. This is very important. This is free resources we're giving to you and free tips we're giving to you. This will definitely help you a lot in making good arguments for your events, and especially for debates that we will be doing in the future as well. For any kind of debate competition you go to, this will be very helpful. So now let's look at the next thing, which is how do you even think of arguments, right? We know what an argument is. We know how you can make an argument, how to structure an argument, but how do we even get like the content to make an argument? Because all of us need some form or the other of information to actually make a reasonable reason, or a rational reason for that matter, to support a particular side. And so let's look at how we generate arguments. We can move to the next slide. And there are 4 main ways we wanted to think about on how to generate arguments. The first way of making arguments is by stakeholders. What does this mean? This means that any person being impacted in the debate, just look at them and see how they're impacted, and you can make an argument of that. For example, if in the debate about death penalty, again, victims are being impacted, then you can make an argument on how the victims of the death penalty, or like how people who are the victims of the crimes like murder and rape will be impacted if the death penalty is abolished, right? And why like crimes might increase towards them, etc., stuff like that. Another stakeholder in this debate is obviously your criminals themselves. Another stakeholder is the government. Another stakeholder is the families of the victims as well, and how much reparations are we giving to them by having the death penalty or by removing the death penalty? Are we actually giving justice to the families who've lost their people, who've lost their children, who've lost their sons and daughters because of someone murdering them or raping them, and how we give justice back to them, right? And so those are different stakeholders that just exist in the death penalty debate. And all the kind of impacts that you get onto them, you can make an argument of that. So an impact onto the government was the fact that the government might misuse the death penalty. That's an impact. An impact onto the victims was the victims are not getting justice now because the death penalty is being abolished. An impact onto the criminals was because the death penalty is abolished, now the criminals are far more likely to do these kind of crimes even more, or they're far less likely to do this crime, and you can prove that however you want. So the kind of impact that you get on stakeholder will become your title of the argument. And then obviously you have to go through the 7 steps to prove why that title is true, why that title has some truth in it, and why that argument makes sense. The second way of making an argument is using different impacts on the same stakeholder. This is not any different from the first one. This is also creating impacts on a stakeholder. But the only difference here is a lot of times there may not only be one impact on a stakeholder. For example, again, in the same debate about the death penalty thing, there might be an impact on the government, wherein that it might become too powerful. But another impact on the government would probably be that the government might be using like a lot of prosecutions against the minority, right? These are 2 different impacts on the same stakeholder that we put under the same argument. Another like case can be obviously for the victims themselves, right? The victims obviously, again, A, will not get justice anymore because the death penalty is being removed. But the second thing is, if the death penalty is removed, more victims are going to exist because people are far more likely to do crimes like murder and rape now because there is no death penalty. So on the same stakeholder of victims, did we create 2 different impacts? One was for justice. The other one was for just like more crimes being done to them. So 2 different impacts on the same stakeholder of victims can be run in this debate. The important thing here is for you to recognize the fact that a stakeholder can have multiple kind of impacts that can be run on the same person itself, on the same stakeholder. So don't keep in mind, don't think of it like that, okay, I've used like victims once, I can't use it again. You can very well use it again. In most debates, you will use the same stakeholder again, because there are far too many things that can happen to a stakeholder just because of the amount of practical impacts that exist in the world today. So this will definitely be used a lot. I got a question in chat. Exploitation of life at will is an impact, right? Definitely, if you're able to explain what exploitation of life at will generally means, I'm assuming this is probably about minorities. If in case it is, then it is definitely an impact. I think it's a little more vague and abstract when you just say exploitation of life at will, Kabir. So if you just give a more specific explanation as to why the death penalty being abolished or having might lead to the exploitation of life, and just specifically connect it back to the title of your argument, then it'll be an impact. But I think exploitation of life, or like any kind of death related impact, or like exploitation related impact of people and the human rights, is always an impact itself. So that's correct. And you've identified it correctly. So yeah, that's fine. Now we'll give you, now the next slide we're going to give to you guys is a list of all stakeholders possible that you can use. Please, please, please note this list down. This is very, very extensive, and a list of stakeholders that you can always rely back on to make arguments in debates. So Avira, you can go to the next slide and we can show everyone the stakeholder list. This is a very extensive list of different stakeholders in different kinds of debates that you can use. Please take a screenshot of this if you don't have one already, and please note it down, because in a debate you won't be able to bring your screenshots in. You'll only be able to get your notebooks, and you can use your notebooks, but you can't use laptops in most in-person debates, and even MUNs don't allow you to use internets as well, for that matter, and they prefer people writing on notebooks and their pens, using their pens. And so please take a note of these kind of stakeholders. This is very important, will be very useful for making good arguments in the future. All of these are different people that you can impact in a different debate, and different kind of stakeholders that can be impacted in a debate. So please, you can definitely use them up, and this will probably help you a lot in kind of making different kinds of arguments on impacting different stakeholders. We can just look at them. The first one is about how we classify people. People can be classified on different things. All of that is, this is there: class, race, religion, sexuality, age, and gender. Obviously caste is also something that can be existing over there, but we're putting caste as in part of the class system, because caste is a classist system, i.e. that the caste system that exists in India tries to classify people on different levels and different kinds of like poverty, economic levels, socio-cultural levels, etc. So caste-based system is generally a part of like a class-based system, which is why we've not put caste as something different, because it's generally like more present in Aryan-based countries, or countries that follow like an Aryan Indo kind of religion and history, and which is why India is a very big example of the caste system. Countries can also be like diversified and created different stakeholders out of, based on these different things. Stages of the development means like developing countries, developed countries, like US is a developed country, Kenya is probably a developing country, China as well is in some ways a developed, but in some ways a developing country as well. And so there are different ways, and obviously it's debatable, but there is some like general notion that that these are developed countries, they're developing countries as well. So that's how you can like classify countries. Organizations is very intuitive and very simple. I'm not going to explain that. Intangible concepts is important. You can make arguments based on intangible concepts: democracy, liberties. These are things that you can use to make principles, right? Principle of democracy, principle of liberty, principle of autonomy. Why should people have the right to make their own choices, right? That's a principle itself, irrespective of its practical impacts. So intangible concepts can be used to make principles. Principle of free speech. Why free speech in and of itself is a really, really good thing. So these are concepts that we don't really have a practical impact on ground, but we just think of them as debatable ideas, and that's what you can use to make principles. Specific groups are also there: parents, etc. People advocacy groups are your social movements, like the feminist movement, the environmental movement. All of these are different kinds of social movements that exist, and these are advocacy groups that support or that try to get the rights of the people or the wants and demands of the people fulfilled, and that's why they're called people advocacy groups. And then there are systems are other forms of groups of people that are generally not trying to gain any profit or trying to have like any organizational institution based system, wherein that they don't have like any general benefit that they're reaping off this, but just structures that exist in society, in almost all forms of society, is what we call a system. And so government is a system. Social media is also put as a system now, based on how popular it is becoming in governing a lot of different kind of things like spreading of news, etc. Police is obviously a system, education system is there, and there are other parts that the government can be divided into. Election commission is a very important system, because there is definitely debates on voting, being able to vote before 18, being able to vote as a minority, being able to vote as an NRI in any other state, or being able to vote as a foreign immigrant as well. Should immigrants be given the right to vote in a country, etc.? These are all kind of systems. Election commission will be a very important system and stakeholder in that debate as well. And so these are different stakeholders you can use. Please again note them down, very helpful for you. We can move to the next slide. These are other two ways that you can make and generate arguments. The first one is by using long-term, short-term ideas. For example, if you want to make an argument about death penalty, what is the long-term implication of the death penalty? If we have the death penalty, it's probably a very hard institution to get rid of. It's probably very strong, it's very stringent, it's very rigid, so it has more long-term implications. But if you remove the death penalty, are the solutions more short-term? For example, is rehabilitation a short-term solution? Is life imprisonment a long-term solution? Where will these slides be shared? I think I'll just answer that right now before I go ahead. These slides can be shared on our Discord group. already the fact that we're putting this up on our YouTube channel should give you access to the recording as well, where you can always go through these slides through the recording and find them over there. However, we will share the actual link to view these slides on our Discord group. So please join our Discord group. That'll be specifically helpful because there's no other way we can actually communicate to you, and we can't be sending out our slides on email specifically because it's very hard for you to go back and get back those kind of slides as well. And for us to keep a track record of these slides, we'll put them up on our Discord group. Like it's like WhatsApp for teenagers, and you can like access it from there. Which channel do you put the slides in? I think we'll probably put it in the meeting once, but since we don't have a specific one, we can create one over there and add it over there directly. But as long as you're there in the Discord group, you will get a notification. So just be aware on the announcements channel, and in the general channel for debate and MUN. In any one of these three like general channels, you will get the basic announcement that there has been slides updated or posted over there, and you can always get it from there. So just be aware and just be a little more active on Discord, and you'll get an idea on which slides, which channel we are posting the slides on. For planning our next session, obviously we'll plan our next session over ideally next week. We try to get them over every weekend. Most probably next weekend as well where we'll continue the debate 101 series and have our session over there. But we'll let you know of the dates and everything. And please follow our Instagram page and you'll get all the information over there as well. So long-term, short-term is another way to form an argument. I explained this about death penalty, and you can think about them as also of making different kinds of arguments. The last of forming an argument is geographical location. This is not as different from the stakeholder thing, but we try to separate it out because it's also a very big thing. A lot of debates are just based on developed countries, on authoritarian countries, on Western liberal democracies, on countries based on different economic levels, on countries based on different like cultural levels, etc. Right? So a lot of different countries have different kind of things that they can be debated on, and there are specific debates just based on like these different kind of countries. And so in those debates, geographical location is a big thing, but also in a lot of your debates, can you run an argument just about developing countries, just about developed countries? And that is fair, because that is a very big thing that we have seen in the debates happening in the past 5 years. We've put this specifically as a different way of making an argument. It's the same thing as a stakeholder one, but we want to make developing countries not as a stakeholder, but we want you to think of this as a location and as a different thing, so that you can also think about this while making arguments, and you don't just put this in the stakeholder bracket and like leave it at the end and forget about it. So for you to just keep that in mind, we've kept that as separately because it's also becoming very popular in making good arguments on developing countries. And so these are 4 different ways of making or generating arguments. The first one was on different stakeholders. Second one was on same impact on the same stakeholder, or on different impact on the same stakeholder. The third one was long-term, short-term, and the fourth one was geographical location, developing, authoritarian, democracy, economic levels differences, social level differences, cultural level differences, all that stuff is geographical location as well. We can move to the next slide and cover the last bit, which is thinking of arguments. Now, generating arguments is different from thinking of arguments because thinking of arguments is a little more broad on like, how do you even get to like what kind of argument do you want to make? This is not practical versus principle. This is a little bit more about just focusing on like the different kinds of arguments that you want to make in general, not practical principle, but how you make arguments in the first place. So basically, this is your step. So once you decide if you want to make a practical or principle, then you go on to this kind of a step where you think of the kind of argument you want to make before even going on to generating arguments from the 4 steps we just told you. And so the first one was generation based, which is using the 4 steps we told you, right? Where you can use any one of the 4 steps we just gave to you and make an argument from that. The second one is using something that the opposition case might run. So anything that you think that the opposition case can run, try to think of an argument that might flip that. Try to think of how your side can actually better that or win on that idea. For example, in the same debate about the death penalty being abolished, if the death penalty is not abolished and does exist, opposition might run the case saying the death penalty should not be abolished because it's the only way we're able to prevent crimes like murder and rape, right? And so that's specifically important for the opposition case to run on proving that the death penalty is an important thing that prevents crime. If on your side from proposition or the government side, or as a delegate, are you able to prove that this country, whenever, even if they said that the death penalty is able to like specifically prevent crimes of murder and rape, if there's any way you're able to flip that in your own case, in your own speech, it's a very, very good thing. It's a very strong argument because you're directly clashing and conflicting with other persons and the opposing side's argument. This is when we call you are being comparative. You're being comparative to the other side. You're being charitable to the other side. You're challenging what the other side is saying and trying to make an argument of that. So that's the second way of making an argument. The third one is opposites of the first speaker. So if someone has already spoken, so the second one was you're thinking of this yourself, you're thinking of what opposition can run and trying to flip that. But now someone has already spoken in the debate, someone has already given some idea in the debate. Now try to think of any opposite to that. In case you cannot figure out what they might have run, now they've already spoken for you. So try to think of an argument on that if you didn't get any argument yourself, and try to flip that to make an argument. And the last type of way of thinking of an argument is vulnerable based arguments. Vulnerable based arguments are also like kind of stakeholder stuff. All of this will relate again because these are all based on similar ideas and debate is very connected. But vulnerable based arguments, specifically the reason why we have pointed out, are arguments only and only based on vulnerable stakeholders. So developing countries, minority groups, etc. These kind of peoples are vulnerable based arguments, and making any impact on them will be vulnerable based argument. The reason why this I'm specifically talking about this as well is because in debates, in WSGC debates, the second speaker usually runs a vulnerable based argument. Or even in an MUN, when everybody's talking about the same kind of arguments on like US and Russia and UK as well, if some third country comes up and just starts talking about countries in Saudi Arabia or countries in the MENA region, right? Countries, like people in Saudi Arabia or like countries in Middle East and North Africa, any one of these countries which are far more vulnerable, they have more issues, they have more conflicts, they have more problems that needed to be solved. If any country, any delegate starts talking about that, or even in a debate where you talk about a minority group or a developing country, that is a far more important impact than just in general talking about the US or in general talking about all of Europe and the Western hemisphere of the world, when clearly countries like India and countries like China or any other country in South Africa or any other country in like African region or any other country in like Middle East are far more important, and they're more important problems that need to be solved, right? And so if you bring up that form of an argument, you will be credited more because those are more important arguments to make in a debate, because the impact is far more important than an impact on in general, like the democracies of the world or in general US and UK, because obviously they'll still be better off if they don't solve the problem, versus in the Middle East, if they don't solve the problem, it'll become far worse, especially with the amount of problems they already have currently going on as well. So that's why vulnerable based arguments are specifically important, and you can make arguments just on vulnerable important stakeholders in your debates itself. Be sure to use the term vulnerable and say it's a vulnerable stakeholder, it's an important stakeholder. It just gives an idea and intention to the judge, to your chair, that you're talking about an important person, you're talking about an important group of people that should be weighed in the debate, that should be valued in the debate itself. And that's how you can think of arguments. The last slide we have to cover are stock arguments. We won't be able to cover drills right now. We did a couple of things that we did an actual drill in the session today, and that was good. We had more drills planned for you, but we'll do that in the next session onwards. So we can go to the last slide, which is go to the next slide, Avira, which is stock arguments. So if you join one of our next sessions, we will specifically give you arguments on each of these different ideas. We'll give you arguments about social movements, about economics, about finance, sports, whatever. All the topics listed here are almost like, this is generally everything that'll come up as a debate topic, as an MUN topic. None of the other topics or nothing else can actually like be predicted from anything apart from these topics, just because these are all the topics that have generally been seen, and this is a very, very vast range of topics that will anyways be coming. And so if you have stock arguments on any one of these topics, you're very, very well prepared for the MUN you're going to go to, or for the debate you might get on a very random topic, right? So these are generally topics that are coming in debates right now. These are topics that can come up for your MUN agendas as well. And so we will give you stock arguments that can always run in specific types of agendas, like agendas for Russia, Ukraine. What are things you can run? Agendas on like water scarcity. What are things you can run as an argument over there? Agendas on like any kind of agendas that you might see in an MUN, right? Nuclear warfare, because that's becoming very, very prominent. Or energy, the IEAA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and like any nuclear kind of a topic that might come up. Those are, we have stock arguments that you can always run on those kind of agendas as well in an MUN. And so in general, like you can have MUNs on different topics, but there are far like similar commonalities you will get between like economic topics, between all topics about warfare, and we'll give you specific stock arguments that you can run in these kind of topics of warfare, in these topics of the economy, topics of the environment, etc. So that it is far easier for you to just use a stock argument, connect it to the context, connect it to the idea that you know in the agenda, and just run that stock argument directly in the debate itself for your MUN as well. And so that is, I think, it for the session today. We don't want to cover anything more, but those are all the things we wanted to cover for the stock arguments. We won't be covering in the drills right now because we don't have enough time. We would have done different kinds of drills. But thank you so much for everyone who joined in. If you can, please keep your camera on. We are taking pictures of everyone who has joined in right now. So if it is possible, please turn on your camera so that we can take your picture and note that you were there throughout the entire session. Let me just take a picture. And everyone, please keep smiling. This will go up on our Insta page. So do whatever fun thing you want to do. Let me just take a picture of everyone here. Awesome. I'm just going to take it from the other side as well. So everyone who has not turned on the camera, I'll wait for a second. Vidushi, Riddhi, Adrita, Sudiksha, Pujana, if you can turn on your cameras. Dia, Kuer, Niyati, yeah, and everyone else is remaining. Please turn on your cameras so that we can give you the certificate that you very much deserve for staying with us for the past 1.5 hours. It's a very complicated session and it was a lot more extensive, but we're so glad you guys joined in. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand now. Anything we've not answered in chat, we'll answer it right now as well. I think all of our questions have been answered by our very amazing team, Manan and Avira, who have been continuously monitoring chat. So they've been doing an amazing job, and Siri and everyone who's been on with us. So your question should have been answered, but if you have anything else, please do feel to raise your hand. But thank you so much for joining in, and we will see you hopefully next weekend on a different session. And yeah, keep debating, keep MUNing, and good luck for the rest of your work that you do in the week. See you and happy Holi to everyone as well. Again, stay back if you have any other questions. We'll end the meeting soon.